Folks, we want to thank you for joining us on what would be a very rainy occasion of Living Word Live. I don't know if you can hear it behind us, but it seems like we got here just in time. We're not soaked, evident by the fact that we're dry, but on the outside, it seems like Noah's flood has visited us again, and we might be stuck here for the next year. So the thing is, we don't have any carrier pigeons to tell us whether or not the land is dry or whatnot. So yeah, welcome. As we had spoken on Wednesday about Christianity and art, we received a few commentaries of people interested in the subject matter, and we want to continue talking about it during this particular instance because it's twofold. I think people wanted to hear more about the topic at hand, but there were also plenty of things that were left unsaid because of time constraints, and we wanted to take up that topic once again. Now, to recapitulate for those of you that were not able to watch the presentation on Wednesday, let us just give a brief overview, a brief summary of what we had spoken of. Among the principal things that we had mentioned is that art is important. I think most philosophers that are worth their weight in salt, so to speak, would tell you that art is important for enculturation. Some might say or ask, what is enculturation? Well, a culture in particular has a set of ideals, concepts, ethics that it passes on to the next generation. And one of the ways that it does this is through the use of art, whether it be through music, painting, literature, what have you. We see this in the Bible, by the way. One of the first things, and we had mentioned this during the ending of the transmission on Wednesday, is that one of the first things that happened when God used Moses to liberate the Israelites from Egypt, he led them in a song. You read this in Exodus. He led them in a song, and it seems like Moses was an author of various songs, by the way, and he leads Israel in songs, and he says, this is to praise God for the marvelous things that he has done and also to bring to remembrance what he has done for us. So obviously the Bible has a lot to say about art. The inherent problem that we Christians tend to have is that we can't seem to find the biblical middle ground for topics that require nuance such as this. What do I mean by this? Well, in the last 100 years, I think we can agree, there's been this tempestuous relationship, to say the least, between the church, between Christians, and art in particular. And it wasn't like this for many years. We see that from biblical times, God mandates, sing a new song unto the Lord. We see that the psalmist, David, he repeats this. Paul himself says that we ought to sing spiritual hymns to one another, edifying one another, and also singing songs unto the Lord.
Sing intelligently.
Intelligently, also, exactly, because when he talks about prophesying, and he says, I will also prophesy with my spirit, but also prophesy with my intellect.
Some songs are just downright stupid or foolish.
No, the stupid is true. They are downright stupid.
I'm trying to be on my best spiritual.
For example, the vast majority of the Taylor Swift, or all, if not all of Taylor Swift's catalog. That's just
somebody thought that was a speedy running back.
True. So I don't want to get too much into a summary because we have plenty of other things we'd like to mention during this meeting. If you haven't seen the previous presentation, we would encourage you to do so because I think we covered a lot of foundational ground for what we're going to mention here. Now, let me continue where we left off on Wednesday.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Because I see in some people's faces and in their comments, some people don't believe this to be important, talking about Christians. And then you get letters saying, can I read this? Can I bring this painting home? Should I be listening to this music? And that's such a huge contradiction. If you don't think it's important, then why later on write a letter or phone us asking, can I do this? This is the time to find out if you can, if you should stay away, etc. So don't just say, since it's not talking about end times, it's not really interesting, because then behind the scenes, you go asking these questions, and even worse, you go around with a bad conscience because you enjoy some of these things and you don't know what to do with them.
Completely agree. I don't know how many times we've mentioned it. We'll mention it once again. Christianity is an overarching ethic. What do I mean by this? Christianity will find its way, it has to find its way into every aspect of your existence. This is where people typically have a problem with Christianity. And by this, I'm not saying that Christianity is inherently wrong. What I'm saying is that people inherently contradict Christianity because it is an inherent understanding that Christianity penetrates into absolutely every part of existence. So therefore, if we limit Christianity's reach into our lives, including in this topic, then you get the attitude that you were just talking about. Can I read this? Can I listen to this? Should I abstain from this? If you're not familiar with what the ethic is and then apply that to art, then we've got a problem, because there are people, as we said on Wednesday, who will use art to enculturate with their ideas, their concepts, which are inherently against God's design.
And again, some people do things that are appropriate, but since they don't know, they haven't found out, and they have this guilt complex of, just about everything, and they'll do that. They'll listen to that, they'll look at that, they'll bring it home, and then they'll feel guilty about that for years.
Let's harp on that for a few minutes, because I think that's important.
Okay.
There are Christians who would say, and we said it on Wednesday, it bears repeating, we mention music because it is the primary, that's going to be the crux of our examples, because it's the primary art form that most people tend to consume. I think we can all agree with that. Not everybody goes to a museum to indulge in the latest paintings, if you can call that art, or sculptures. Not everybody travels to Italy to see Renaissance art and take in Leonardo's or Da Vinci's art, or Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. I think music, and then followed by literature, even though less and less people are reading every day, is the primary form that people ingest art. So we're going to use that. We're not ignoring these other things, but that's the primary art form that people tend to ingest. So a common question that you have gotten throughout the years, that I've gotten throughout the years, is this music okay? Is this music okay? What's the barometer? What's the measuring stick that I should use to decide whether or not I can consume this, or if I should abstain from it?
I think everybody knows what is bad, evil, and tends to corrupt. Stay away from that. For example, the Bible talks about singing and dancing. Yes, singing and dancing, but it depends on how you use it. John the Baptist lost his head because there was this particular dancer that enchanted the king, and he said, off with his head.
That's a good word, by the way. That's because it goes perfectly with what we're talking about, enchanted.
Yeah, so it's a simple rule. If it tends to corrupt, if it glorifies corruption, if it brings about a change in society that it's not good, it's not biblical, then you stay away from it. But then you get the hypocrisy, once again, based on people not knowing what the Bible teaches on this. I don't listen to secular music. I just don't listen to secular music. I don't listen to secular music, but I'm getting married, and you know what? I'm going to bring in a couple of secular pieces. Because for a wedding, I guess we got a license. We got a license for that. And that's the kind of stuff we do that people mock us.
So then the question is, because they're still going to have the question is, then even in that hypocrisy, is that necessarily something that we have to avoid altogether?
I think the hypocrisy is just as bad, because people then tend to stay away because they see our fluctuation, and then the guilt trip and the duplicity, and they go, I don't want anything to do with these people.
So then the question is, what's the middle ground? Because I think there is a middle ground, and I'm going to ask you so I can...
I think everybody's looking for things that edify. Fine, look for things that edify. But if something doesn't really tear you down, or it does something for your romantic life within the marriage and, the holiness of the Lord, then what's wrong with it? I just don't get why people all of a sudden incriminate any and all things that don't come out particularly from the church or from Israel. When you talk about music, they'll say stuff like, yeah, I can see Moses writing songs and Israel singing songs, but those are Jewish songs, and maybe we should do Jewish songs. And then they'll bring out a piece of horn, and they even misconstrue the purpose of the shofar. It was to call in special events, solemn events, and now they think this is something that Miles Davis used. Or Chris Botti, and you go like, these people are utterly confused, and they should try to find out, listen to teachings like this so they can get it right, and then share it with their friends.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to give you my personal view on this matter, and it accords perfectly with what Dad just said. I think everyone here knows we're both musicians, have been for the longest time. And when you hear a good composition. It's something that automatically attracts attention. It's insignificant whether or not you're a musician, because let's face it, there are musicians that compromise on the craft, and that's a whole nother story. But once you see that someone put a lot of effort and time to make something that is eloquent, that is elegant, that obviously uplifts your spirit, or tries to give out a message. I'll give something that's going to shock some people. I don't know how many of you have heard of the band Muse. Have you heard that band? I'm sure some of you have heard that. They have some of the best lyrics out there, and they're a secular band. Why? Because they speak out against government abuses. That's just to give an example, but let me put it this way, I don't put aside their hypocrisy on the matter, because they constantly talk about the man, and yet they're signed to one of the biggest record labels in the world. You see, as a Christian, you have to be able to see all things for what they are, and like Paul says, examine all things, hold fast to that which is good, and rebuke everything else. So this idea where, like Dad says, all of a sudden, in other words, if you're not part of a choir team, if you don't do 4-part harmony, or if you don't just play the guitar, the sanctified instruments, so-called, a lot of these Christians will put a guilt trip on you for taking in things that aren't necessarily damaging to you or won't do any damage to you, or you're discerning enough to know, I'm not going to let that, as it were, penetrate my spirit.
I think believers tend to think, for the most part, that it's either evil or holy. And some pieces of music are just like indifferent to all of that. They're just out there. And I could quote a few, but I'm not going to do so, because then they'll say, well, he sanctified this one. Let them sanctify their own music.
Exactly. I think it becomes, what we're saying here to begin this is that this is a thing of conscience. And this is another one of those issues like food, shall we say, where Paul himself denominates, he splits up Christians into two groups, weak-minded brethren and strong-minded brethren. Paul says to one, no day in particular is special unto the Lord, and he eats that way. To one, it's this day in particular, and this meal is in particular special unto the Lord, and I have to keep it. And this person that doesn't seem to see anything wrong with not keeping these days for the Lord, he's wrong. He calls that brother the weaker-minded brethren. If you apply the principle that Paul applies there to other things that you consume, then you begin to have a better understanding of how the Christian ethic works in these things. Now, allow me to say this too, because I get it. Some of you, some others will ask, what with that is inherently toxic? For example, if this is the case with what you and your father are saying, does that permit me to listen to Cardi B all day? Just to give you an example. Well, now we're going to, the examples you're using, you're going to these extreme examples.
What was the name on that?
Cardi B is her name.
It has nothing to do with Bacardi?
I'm thinking it does. Some people have... Some people, it does, okay. I'm glad you clarified that, because is it? So
seems like a play on words there.
Probably, and not original, I guess we can say. Not to say anything about a personal life. Another topic for another day.
Bring up another group and call it Cardiac.
That's right. That's right. When you think about it, that in and of itself is not art in the purest sense of the term, as we defined on Wednesday. Because if you remember what we said on Wednesday, we're talking about a systematized set of rules for being able to perform something. If you're a musician, if you know anything about music, you know that there's scales, there's notes, there's music theory, there's a structure to all of it. But when you have something like that, that has no other value, if we can use that term, other than to contaminate your spirit with things that are inherently against God's design, and to make you desensitized to what is good, moral, and beautiful. And art should be one of those things that should lead you, as it were, to an elevated understanding of what is beautiful, what is good, what is holy. That in and of itself, I agree. Let me mention one more thing, because there are other aspects of this that need to be mentioned. I know everybody here, I don't have to ask. Well, you know what, let me ask just for the sake of it. How many of you know who Michael Jackson is? Everybody knows who Michael Jackson is. Even people that don't speak English know who Michael Jackson is. Oh! Right? Right? I remember listening to a lot of music critics, the ones who were willing to speak out about this years ago, say that even though some of the music that Jackson put out, Quincy Jones, how many of you know who Quincy Jones is? Quincy Jones, arranger, producer, composer for a long time, excellent at what he does. A lot of people said that one of the damages that Michael Jackson had on American culture was music became the platform for something else. It wasn't about the music anymore. I don't know if that makes sense. In other words, Michael Jackson used the music for entertainment purposes. It was no longer about going to listen to a band or a singer and listening to them perform the music. It was about the moves. It was about the sensationalism of what he was doing, et cetera, et cetera. It shifted. He wasn't the first one, by the way. He wasn't the first one. But he, as it were, got that train going, and others began to say, you know, music is just a stepping stone. It's a secondary thing.
It became about the persona, right?
Exactly. So all of a sudden you see also a shift in culture where now we're no longer using art for the reasons that we stated previously. Now it's just a stepping stone to other things. You've mentioned this before. How many now, you were just talking about this on Wednesday with the last book that you read called The Masters. How many of them saw their art form as the primary vehicle through which they can send out a political message?
And I've seen it work in strange ways. Many pastors, and I think I'm right on this one, have used the pulpit as a gateway to a political career.
That's true.
And you know, you dare not as a Christian point that out because now you're ranking on the brethren, but you have to be fair in all these things.
So the question then, and I think it begs to be answered, we see the effect that art can have on the mind because as we said on Wednesday, and that's the main thing I want to talk about, whatever a person puts out, Webster himself says that art is, we can categorize it among the trades and also the set of rules for the liberal arts or the polite arts, and it comes from the human imagination, from the mind. Music is something that where a person feels inspired to write a particular song or lyrics, and then they put it down on paper and then they perform it on their instrument with their voice and whatnot. So yes or no, when Jesus says out of the heart, yes, out of the mouth proceeds what a man has in his heart, I'm paraphrasing, we can say the same thing then about music, right?
Although it seems like we're just focusing in on music, I think the reason we're focusing in on it is because it's the one that most people have questions about, or talking about the arts, the one that just about everybody brings into his or her own private life. But staying on the topic and using music then, you can see how much it affects you and how it put a marks in your life in a couple of things. Taylor Swift, she is so popular now. She's not a teenager. Take a look at the people that show up at her events. Very young girls,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yep.
Time will pass, and if she still decides that she wants to have a singing career in her 60s or 70s, these people that were marked by her will show up because we hear lines like the music of my generation, which means that it stays with you. And so you have old rock and rollers like the Rolling Stones still filling venues with all the people that they influenced with their music. So this is something that is real. This is something that you have to acknowledge is real, and it affects everyone. And once you do that, then I think you're in a better position to handle it properly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. This is one of those things where handle with care, so to speak. You have to handle this with care and not mindlessly, and that's the word, mindlessly, like a lot of Christians do, where they deceive themselves into thinking that they're handling it properly by the rules that you just said. No, you can't do this. I don't know how many times you've told the story, but it bears that we mention it once again, because talk about things that go from nuance to ridiculous. When you were up and coming, as it were, as a believer, the mindset of the church was there's certain instruments that are not sacrosanct.
Yes.
So therefore, we ought not touch them because the world uses this for this particular issue, so we can't introduce that into the church.
Yes, absolutely. And then along came Marino, and he brought his electric guitar with him, and all of a sudden the lyrics were good. So maybe we can sanctify, the evangelicals said. Maybe we can sanctify a few pieces that use the electric guitar, and then all hell broke loose. That's how they would describe
Sure,
it.
sure, sure.
and basically all the instruments came in. I remember the same thing happened with rap music. We'll never bring that into the church, and now you've got all kinds of Christian rappers. And somebody simplified it to the following idea. This is art that goes along with the beat. If you enjoy it and it edifies you and it has good lyrics, more power to you. Some people that are better developed as musicians, so they have some training in music and they understand music a little better, will tell you this is not the quality of art that the people that are reaping in truckloads of money. This is not the quality of art that they've made you believe it is. If you want quality of art in music, you have to start kicking it back, not just a couple of decades, but maybe a couple of centuries. Because one thing that is obvious is that the quality of the music, just talking about music, and if you want to take it to art and sculptures, we can take it there, is definitely dropped down to the point to where, like we were saying on Wednesday, you take a welder, he can put together 10 pieces of metal and they'll place it in front of a building and they go, the sunrise. And you go, I don't see any sunrise in that, but you know, they call it art.
Dad, this is where I have serious issues with the church. Why do I say this?
Because they'll say, that's the sunrise.
That's the sunrise. Well, and that's a good point. You bring that up. It's comical. But it's also, frankly, maddening. Why do I say this? We go from one end, you can't have that in church, to now you can have it in church, to all of a sudden, now we sanctify things that ought not be sanctified. The church has gotten it wrong for the last 100 years or so. Because in my estimation, at least from what I read in the text, Christians should be using art to enculturate, not rejecting it or taking, as it were, the world's form as the baseline for that art. I'll repeat that again. The church has gotten it wrong for many years. We can't have that in here. We're not going to innovate. Even though, curiously enough, when you read the Bible, David created various instruments. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes that one of his pastimes, read it, was collecting instruments. It was one of his prized possessions, aside from wives and concubines. That's another story for another day. That's another story for another day. Had a lot of them. Maybe there was a competition in his mind. Could I have more wives and concubines than instruments? Let's see what I have mostly in my vault. Anyways, curiously enough, and then the feminists will shriek, how dare you? Yes, I dare. It's a curious thing because you see over and over again the Psalms, many of them are canticles. And then the Bible says, sing a new song unto the Lord. What has the church done nowadays? You know what? To make this profitable, we're going to take the cookie cutter forms that the world puts on and we're going to duplicate that for the consumption of Christians. You know, I hate to say this because I thoroughly enjoyed their music when I didn't know any better. But DC Talk, they were so popular in the late 90s and early 2000s with the youth because they sounded exactly like Nirvana. If you listen to Jesus Freak and you listen to Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit, you can tell that Toby McKinnon said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. The screaming guitars at the same type of tone, the same type. Wait a minute. And Christians let it pass by saying, hey, you know what? This is like our foray into enjoying secular music, but without the secular tag. So let's go ahead and bring it in. Instead of saying, wait a minute, we can innovate these things. But in the void that the church left, what did they say? The world said, we'll pick it up. The void you left, we'll fill it. You know.
And the funny thing about all of this, if you really follow the sequence, most of the stuff that we get moved over into rock and roll and what they call the blues today's, this music dates back to the church, and it dates back to the slaves. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's a good
because point. Even when you think about Moses and the songs he wrote and what Israel sang, where did they get that from?
It's true.
From the Egyptians? Or did the experience of being enslaved produce something for them, or did God help them to produce something and then it was copied and taken over? There's history to this. So, you know, just like you take young people today, let's say somebody comes to the Lord, a musician comes to the Lord when he's 25, 30, 40 years old. This is all he knows. So this is what he's going to bring into the church, but I'm not stealing your thunder.
No. It's a great point. I'm glad you stole it because This is another point. I continue to harp on what you just said. How many times have you and I heard of struggling musicians who want to bring this mentality, and I think it's a pure mentality to the church, and say, we can do something better. And what does the church do? No, it's not marketable. No, we can't get people in through the doors because that music is overly complicated. No, we can't really do that because people aren't going to like it because they just want Taylor Swift sing-alongs.
It's the same thing with food. Son, look what your mother has prepared for us today. I prefer a quarter pounder. I'll wait till you guys eat, and then you can take me over to McDonald's by the Golden Arches, and I'll have a quarter pounder with fries. Is that okay, Mom? I know you labored over that, but that quarter pounder is, I think, is best. Quarter pounder rules. He doesn't know what he's missing.
I agree.
He doesn't know what he's consuming.
But then doesn't that also speak loudly about Christians in particular and the taste that they have not developed, where they think that the inferior is the superior and the superior is the inferior?
This is one of the things that God taught Israel, and he said you should teach it to your children. Whatever this experience was that I allowed you to go through, make sure you convey it to the next generation and to the next generation and to the next generation. That's the only way to keep what is really good and important alive. Keep it in the present.
Yeah, I agree. It's and some of you might have just heard what I've said and say, so are you saying that I need to educate myself musically? Yes. If you want edification in your life, true entertainment, you've heard me talk about this before. I've written articles on it. That true entertainment is not mindlessly sitting and simply being a recipient for any garbage that people put together.
But how can you truly compare if you don't know different genres played in different generations? Exactly. How can you really say, I'm going to analyze this and then I'm going to be fair about my criticism when there's certain things you've never even enjoyed or looked into thoroughly?
Dad, the point you just brought is excellent. For example, how many times have you and I read maybe a review of a particular book? This is one of the authors of our generation. Language is eloquent. You and I pick up that book and we're thinking, what? This language is eloquent? You read, for example, the writings of, let's go a little more recent, a person like Thomas Jefferson. Most college students wouldn't be able to read Thomas Jefferson and understand what the man wrote. Because there is an art to literature as well, by the way. Composition of words, the uses of phrases. Folks, if you doubt us on this, Jesus is an artist. That can't be. Jesus was not a storyteller. A sower went out to sow in the fields. Jesus' primary methodology of teaching was using storytelling to get across such profound ideas that even a man that was well schooled in the law, Nicodemus, said, what do you mean I have to be born again? What do you mean? Does it mean I have to go into my mother's womb again? Jesus knew how to use words, knows how to use words to convey the idea, and then when you unpack it, years later, you're still saying, I didn't know that that truth was inherently in there. This is the problem when Christians are taught by modern evangelicalism to hate their heritage. I'm going to repeat that again. Christians are taught, you were saying this earlier, to hate their heritage. And then a couple of slaps of paint on canvas, that's artistry. No, that's not art. That's just downright laziness and a person that didn't want to develop themselves and their hand to be able to produce something of superiority.
I see something funny in just about everything, in case you hadn't noticed. All of a sudden you have archaeologists who are digging around in a cave somewhere, and they go, stop, look at what we just found. There's all kinds of writings on this wall. Bring in the Egyptologist. And the expert comes in and says, what this means is that the Pharaoh, and he goes on to explain what all the Egyptian hieroglyphics were conveying. Then you take that expert and you show them today's language, and he'll say something to the effect of, I have no idea what those funny little faces are trying to convey. It's emojis. Today's hieroglyphics. And yet the young people communicate with that. So you can take this guy and call him a moron or tell him, listen, you need to get up to speed here on emojis, because it's basically the same thing except it's been dumbed down. And so I see all these things as something with a lot of humor in it, and then people get trapped in one side or the other instead of just proceed with your life and enjoy it, because, you know, like somebody said, this is the only one that you have, at least on this side of the road.
Sure. And it's a great point you bring up also, because if the system, let's call it, inherently leads you to a place where you believe that what they're putting out, the garbage they're putting out, is the superior thing, then that, you know, using the analogy you used earlier about food, you don't taste what's superior, then there's no enrichment in your existence.
And it all starts with the seed. Who would have told us that a happy face was going to turn into all of this?
It's true. It's true. Stuff the teachers used to write that on your paper with an A+. Here you go. Here you go. Beautiful, beautifully written, right? Let me put it to you this way, folks, just to simplify this and begin to put a bow on this and wrap it nicely. I think it's important that each and every one of us, we enculturate ourselves with that which inherently elevates and enlightens. And you have to pass that on to your children as well. One thing that my parents did with us, and we've done with our children, is that which we recognize enculturates, we pass that on. I found it interesting because a few years ago, there was a person who's, we'll call him a senior, heard me singing something of his generation. Says to me, "You know that song?" Why? Because probably his family experience is everyone else's family experience. They know this generation stuff. They don't know anything from my past, which is a sad thing, by the way, because, I mean, it is just devastating that even happens. "You know that song?" "Of course I know that song." "But how do you know that song?" "Well, my father passed on this information for me, and frankly, it was training, and I recognize the superiority of it." He says, "Your dad did a great job, tell him that." And I did tell him that. And we've done the same thing with our children, because we recognize that there is an inherent superiority and there's a biblical mandate in passing these things on to the next generation. This is what we find from Genesis and on. What is it that God says to Abraham, or says about Abraham, excuse me? He says, "Because I know that Abraham will teach his children and subsequent generations to walk in my law and in my ordinances and in my path." There's something to be said there. It's not, most parents tend to take that as, well, we're just going to teach them Bible verses. No, enculturation is an overarching, it's an encapsulating thing where it's not just teaching them text, you're teaching them principles of living. You're teaching them art. You're teaching them mathematics. You're teaching them how to taste better food. It's an thank you. It's an overarching, it seems like telephones love it when I make great points. It's an enculturation thing.
That's 2 great points.
I must be making great points. Pretty soon it's going to sound like Las Vegas in here.
You are on a roll.
I'm on a roll. What was the point I was making?
You lost your roll.
I lost my roll. Thank you. Enculturating. If I keep saying enculturating, will the phone keep going? Enculturating. Ka-ding! Enculturating. Ka-ding! Let me leave you with a couple. Let us leave you with a couple of texts here. You want me to rap? I was making a great point. Yeah, I can't. I'm not a rapper. There was.
This is not a very Christian gathering.
It's not a very Christian gathering. Exactly. There used to be a tandem. There used to be a tandem in wrestling. You watched wrestling? I did watch the wrestling. There used to be a tandem in wrestling, a duo that they would come out and their lead song would say "Rap is crap." that was their stick. There were 2 country guys that said "Rap is crap." All right, let's visit. This is part of what we had mentioned earlier, Exodus 15. Exodus chapter number 15, verse 1 through 2. We're going to run through this really quickly, so if you just want to write it down, we'll read it for you. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song. Man, there's something to that. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. This is very interesting, the way that Moses says, the Lord is my strength and my song. Did you notice that in antiquity, when nations went to war, there was always either drums or a band playing behind the scene or playing somewhere in the distance? The song, as it were, is used to pump you up, as it were, and prepare you for battle. David himself had constructed a lot of these songs to prepare Israel for battle. 33rd Psalm.
By the way, that song, or the lyrics, was used for maybe a couple of decades in evangelical circles.
Exodus 15?
Kawaii hinete,
Oh,
kawaii
that's right.
hinete.
That's right. Yep. Psalm 33, the 33rd Psalm, verse 2 and on. It says, praise the Lord with harp, sing unto him with the psaltery, and an instrument of 10 strings. This is very interesting. Harp, sing unto him with the psaltery. Southern Baptists will tell you the psaltery is the book that they've published, and only the book they publish, and that's the psaltery that you have to sing from. Interesting. And an instrument of 10 strings. Sing unto him a new song. Oh, so all of a sudden the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't have a copyright on the psaltery, right? Play skillfully with a loud noise. This is a burning point for me, and I know it has been for you.
Right there, man.
Exactly. This is a burning point for you and me, and has been for years. When musicians have said, you know what, we need to play this skillfully. What's the typical phrase? No,
It's for the Lord.
It's for the Lord. It's a big
It's
deal.
for the
Just
Lord.
put together whatever you can. 2 notes and you're fine.
He'll take whatever you splice together and he'll get a kick out of it.
How's that for giving the Lord your best? Very interesting. Yeah, but Gio, there are people that they use Jesus as a stepping stone for their own popularity. I get it. I get it. But there are people whom genuinely play skillfully for the Lord. You can't deny that. Don't go to the extremes when the text is very clear.
Okay, but if we bring in the skillful musicians, how much do we have to pay them?
Oh, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. Now I'm going to go off on another tangent.
Get the chimes ready.
Exactly. Now I'm going to go off on another tangent. You know, I'm going to say something that will bother a few people, but I'm used to it. If you're going to write me an email, I'm not going to read it. Or if you're going to tell me afterwards, I'm not going to listen to you. I'll just tell you, be gone, please. Be gone from my presence. What was it that you posted on Telegram a few days ago? Get thee behind me, Satan? That's exactly what I'm going to say. Having ministered for a long time now, and having been in ministry for a long time and being part of a pastoral family, I can genuinely say that many times Christians simply don't care about those that provide them something to eat spiritually, whether it be through song, whether it be through books, whether it be through sermons. It is pitiful to see the amount of Christians that don't put any money, as it were, towards things that are superior, and that's why the church partially is starving for these sorts of enculturating things. We're willing to pay Taylor Swift for her album, but for a band that is up and starting and trying to put something together, how much? $5 for that? That's a lot of money. That's just downright pathetic.
Then if you come up with bingo, they'll criticize that
Oh,
also.
that's true. That's true.
And the bingo is supposed to pay for that stuff.
Exactly.
I think.
Exactly. But aren't you supposed to do it for free? I want you to go to work tomorrow and tell your boss, I'm here to work for free, dang it, because I'm a Christian and I give everything away. Yeah, right. If you knew how long it took musicians just to hone their craft, you would have a different attitude about it. If you knew how long it took a minister, a properly trained minister, to put something together for people, you would say, minister, here you go. Because you don't value that. Christians don't value that. Because in the great scheme of things, the quarter pounder is better than the 8-ounce sirloin that was prepared from a proper cow, so to speak.
A Christian cow, mind.
A Christian cow, by the way. This is why Paul himself, he says, ministers are worthy of double honor. And when he's talking about money there. I mean, it's just downright pathetic. So Christians complain on the one hand, we don't have this, and when you get it, I can't pay for that, that's too expensive. Do you know how much it takes, for example, to pay for studio time? I remember when we did the band many years ago, you're charging that much for CDs? What I want to do is hit you over the head with my drumsticks. You don't know how long it took me. The years that I put in training that no one saw, in my bedroom where I kept my parents up at night practicing, the amount of effort and time and money that I put into it. Plus the amount of time and effort that we put into the studio just to put out a CD that costs $10. $10. And people were saying it's still expensive. But then they go to the next door restaurant and pay $20 for a steak. I mean, it's downright pathetic. It really is. Christians are at fault. Man, you guys take a lot of shots at your own people. You better believe it, because we don't mince, as it were. We don't try to see things with our eyes covered.
And then they need to figure out how much Catholicism they still have in operation in them, because I think it kicks back to that religious mentality.
I completely agree. Isn't it curious, though, that we're talking about this in Israel's situation? First God, and then David says the Levites are the ones that are going to manage the situation with the music. Oh, and they were going to take from what the public had given for the tabernacle, and they were going to be fed, as it were, off of that, and they were going to be trained off of that. They were on the public dole, so to speak.
So we need to tell Gene Simmons, a Jew, that he needs to bring the shofar.
No longer playing the bass.
And Gene is very crafty, very
Yes,
astute.
he is. Yes, he is. Sing unto him a new song. Play skillfully with a lot of... I still remember. Yes, I'm going off on tangents. I still remember when a guy says to me, have you heard Hillsong? And I said, Hillsong is crap. Hillsong is not good music. He almost short-circuited. What do you mean? Well, not only the fact that their music is just downright silly, but the fact of the matter is that their teachings, but you can't say that. Well, lo and behold, eventually the thing started coming out. This is what happens when your tastes are not developed, when you're not enculturated. Sing unto him a new song, play skillfully with a loud noise, for the word of the Lord is right, and all his works are done in truth. Ecclesiastes 7:5. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. Ouch! That one hurts. Gio, all I listen is to Song of Fools. Then you're a fool yourself. Maybe you shouldn't be wondering why you act a fool. If all you listen to is Song of Fools, you got a problem. Enculturation, I keep saying it. And lastly, Colossians 3:16, to bring it to the New Testament. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. I wanted to end, Dad had mentioned it earlier, I wanted to end with this. 1 Corinthians 14:15. If you want a biblical ethic on how to approach art and how the same can influence you towards a better walk, and you use it for that, listen to this. What is it then? I will pray with the Spirit, and I will pray with the understanding also. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will sing with the understanding also. But if your understanding has not been shaped, taught adequately, how can you know what's inherently superior and what's inherently inferior? That's a problem. So, Gio, where do you suggest that I start? Listen to things, as it were, that are outside of your comfort zone. I've heard people say that you should begin with classical music. I've heard people say you should start with jazz. I've heard other people say that you should listen to things that are necessarily, as it were, inclined to superiority, and allow your taste buds to begin to adapt to those things. I've also advised throughout the years that don't look to the mainstream. The mainstream is not going to give you things which are inherently superior. It's not, because they're looking for mass market appeal. Look for things that are independent, bands that are independent, musicians that are independent. A lot of them put out really, really, really good stuff. And by the way, sometimes they're even giving away their music for free because they just want the exposure. And all they want you to do is to share it with other people. They're out there. You just have to search for them. You have to do the due diligence. No, but I'd rather Spotify recommend. Okay, then, continue doing what you're doing and don't complain anymore about it.
Listen, all you have to do is exercise some discernment. Let's talk to the Latinos here. A few years ago, when you heard this, you know what I'm talking about? The Macarena. What do you think is involved? What do you think is behind that? I don't want it. The conga line. Then they go into these African lyrics. Put it away. It's just simple discernment. Yeah, but I have to listen to it at least once so I can discern. Yeah, That's true. But the problem is that when you do listen, you don't listen to discern, you listen to see if you like it. And once you listen just to see if you like it, you're kind of not using the right test, the right examination for these things. So, again, I believe in most of these things, the church, the teachers, the pastors actually enslave people just by the very fact that whatever they teach about this, they get you in fear. And when fear gets involved, that's a losing proposition just about every time.
There you have it, folks. We want to thank each and every one of you for viewing this transmission. We ask you that if this content continues to edify you and inform you, especially against whatever the mainstream media and mainstream thought is, which that's part of what we do through Living Word Live, we would ask you firstly to share this content with other people so they too can know the truth in this world full of uncertainty. Don't forget to donate. Your patronage is important to us because it allows us to continue to put out this content for your benefit. There's a link beneath the video player. Simply click on it. We're currently using PayPal services to process those patronages. Thank you beforehand for your consideration and for your donation.
If you have questions, send them our way, because once we shut down the recording, we're going to answer questions here, and perhaps we'll publish those, maybe not. But if you do have questions, send them our way, and we'll try to answer your questions, because maybe there's something we didn't cover, and there's a question that's lingering there. We'd like to tackle that also.
Absolutely. You can email us specifically through info@Living Word Live, or Living Word Podcast, livingwordpodcasts.com, Living Word Podcast, or drop us a line through Telegram. It's probably the easiest way to reach us on our channel, Living Word Live. That's all for now. Thank you so much. We're meeting again virtually on Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. for the next edition of Living Word Live. Until the next occasion that we meet, may the Lord shine his face upon you.